What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with the live stream, both for the Fortinet and over there for the BMW PGA for the Euro. Going to break down both golf tournaments, bring you what you need to know for your lineups and for your props to go out there, have yourself a week, and hopefully make it a profitable and a good sweat in the process. But first off, welcome to the live stream, everyone around. Whether you've got a drink in hand, water, you're just building lineups, or even still at work at this point, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks. Of course, guys, the little break away from golf. I know it's not going to be an every week basis during the fall, but still, all of these tournaments, we've got GPPs to take down, outright bets to try and cash. Just try and take advantage of them. So for those willing to put in the research, willing to get their hands a little bit dirty this week, it should be one to go out there and extract some profit. There's a lot of people that are more focused on NFL, college football. Hell, you've got the end of the baseball season going on right now. So a lot of distractions out there. Honestly, this time of year, people are busy with school and stuff like that too. So there's even more stuff going outside of just DFS and sports. It's a time to take advantage, right? If you've got the time, got the resources to go out there and figure out the slate, well, it's the time for you to shine. So first off, welcome. We got Maga down there. It says, hey, Luke, hey, guys. I'm good to be back. Awesome sentiment. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. So we're going to start it off with a look at the weather, take a look at whether there's a potential weather edge to be had here, and then try and deep dive some of the prop and DFS slates. So we'll start off with a look at Thursday's weather on the HRRR model, which is the most accurate within 24 hours. And you'll see that the morning wave tomorrow is looking to be next to perfect. I'd prefer them to be in slightly higher temperatures, closer to like the 70 to 73 range, like they have in the afternoon, but next to no winds from the sustained and the wind gust perspective. And then in the afternoon, it gets a little bit more significant, but we're not talking about winds that are going to blow people off the golf course, right? I mean, it's 8-9 miles an hour. It's like 10-11 mile an hour wind gusts. I mean, these guys should get after the course tomorrow. So in terms of a split between AM, PM, I would say the AM wave is going to have slightly easier conditions. The one little caveat here, though, being that the slightly colder conditions early, I think might work against players a little bit. But now when we look at Friday, you'll see that the HRRR model, because it's only accurate within 24 hours, isn't going to have all the data for Friday. So if we take a peek at some of the other models here on windy.com, you'll see that most of them on Friday have the winds slightly higher in the afternoon. If we take a look at Media Blue here, it's the same thing, right? Slightly higher winds the later in the day that you get. Icon model, same thing here. Pretty high wind gusts on this model, but in general, the Icon model has higher wind gusts projected. GFS model, same thing, except maybe Thursday on the GFS, and then I'd say maybe even the NAM model here. Actually, sorry, it's the Media Blue model that I was thinking of here. It looks like the winds in the afternoon really aren't as bad, right, as day one, right? Tomorrow, they're expecting it to be in the 8 to 11 mile an hour range, and you can see it's not until really like 3-4 p.m., on a few of the models here for Friday, that the winds even kick up to like 8-9 miles an hour. So perhaps the AM wave, the AM PM wave in general, or the PM wave on Friday, gets slightly easier conditions than what the guys are going to get tomorrow afternoon. But that would be nitpicking at the very best. So I think if you're going to play a wave advantage, it would be the AM PM wave for me, right? Tomorrow, we know that those guys are likely to get a sizable advantage. And then on Friday, right, a few of those models really weren't calling for all that much wind on Friday afternoon. So if that ends up coming to fruition, right, maybe the guys tomorrow are the ones that you want off going off early. But again, I think that's a micro edge, right? I think you're talking about like a half a stroke advantage, likely after the 2 days, which might help you out with a few tiebreakers, right? If you have two players that you really just can't choose between, and one of them is AM, PM, and one of them is PM, AM, maybe take the AM, PM wave. But I mean, even that, I mean, is something that I'm not really doing this week. I have plenty of the PM, AM guys on my player pool. A lot of the guys towards the top of the pricing just happen to be PM, AM wave to begin with. So I think if you're going to try and take only the AM, PM guys because of a micro edge that you see that might be like half a stroke, just isn't something that I normally indulge in. And I know some people out there, right, might see like a half a stroke advantage and think that's a little bit more significant. To me, that's not enough to go out there and act on it, right? I got to see like a 3/4 of a stroke advantage to get serious about playing a weather edge fully, because every time you even have like a stroke and a half advantage, normally at least 2 people get into the optimal lineup that are playing in the shitty wave, right? And when it's like a half a stroke advantage, a lot of times it's 3-3, right? You could have, it was a crapshoot between AM and PM anyways. So that's why I don't overreact to that. I mean, there are time and places, especially in Showdown, to go out there and play a weather edge. But for week long, when you have just a trivial difference between the waves like we have right here, it just doesn't feel like the situation to go out there and attack that. So from the weather perspective, you're not going to see a huge bias in my player pool. Not a lot of changes when it comes to my exposure because of the weather out there. The only thing I would say is that for tomorrow's Showdown, I would be attacking AM wave guys. So if I was playing Showdown, like a Max Homa, for example, would probably be my spend up option. A Bo Hostler would be in plenty of those Showdown lineups. Same thing with like a JJ Spawn there. But outside of that, it doesn't affect very much, right? I think you're going to see the waves kind of equalize throughout the 2 days. Again, maybe the AM PM gets like a 0.1, 0.2 shot advantage, but that's kind of what I'm expecting right there. Maybe half a stroke at the very most. So when you're playing in GPPs this week, right, that brings us back to the game theory aspect. How are we going to play it, right? If there's not a weather edge to go after, we're going to have to find some sort of way to, gain that advantage, right? Make it worth playing, right? Out there for week-long lineups. And usually that's just the game theory edge, right? Trying to find lower owned leverage plays in GPPs that you can take at lower ownership compared to their peers and hopefully hit on those players and not share them with quite as many people. So, Justin Thomas, I talked about as a potential pivot. The ownership on JT has slightly gone up as the week has gone on, but it's still only at 16.5%, which is about half the ownership, a little bit over half the ownership of what we have on Max Homa. So I'm playing the game theory edge, right? I know Max Homa's won here twice in a row. He's in better form than JT, but on a week where we don't have a weather edge, to me, you've got to take the game theory edge. You've got to go after some low-owned plays. Golf's a volatile sport. You see it week in and week out, crazy outcomes that you wouldn't expect, and you got to embrace that, right? When you don't have like a weather edge to go off, like you don't have a tangible edge to act on, right? You've got to force it in at some point, and that's essentially what I'm doing this week. Same thing with Sahith. He's much higher owned than he was earlier in the week. He was closer to like 15, 16% on a Monday, Tuesday. Now he's there at 20.7%. So both of these were players that I talked up in my core plays video. So obviously, I guess people agreed around the industry that they were being slept on a little bit, and they're still lower owned than a lot of peers, right? I've got Cam Davis, Steven Yeager, now slightly lower owned than a Sahith Theegala, but considering long-term pedigree, right, guys like Sahith should be 5 to 10% higher owned, right, than guys like a Yeager and Cam Davis. So I would still argue that they're solid values, that they're still lower owned than they probably should be, but that's the approach that I'm taking, right? Without a weather edge, I'm going out there and trying to take players that I think are lower owned than they should be. So let's catch up with chat, see what's going on, and then we'll get through this player pool and then to props afterwards. What's going on, Colby? What's going on, James? Love golf being back for sure. What's going on, Brant? We've got a question about Reavie and Todd. So I like the course history for Reavie. Brendan Todd, I don't really have a hot take on in either direction. I think he's a decent play at this kind of golf course. But yeah, Ches Reavie, if you take a look at just pure shots gained metrics, is the best player in the history of Silverado. So if you're looking at this field, if you're looking at really any player that's teed it up at this golf course with any real sample size, Ches Reavie is the cream of the crop. And he's a very similar player to a Brendan Todd. So if you want to take the Ches Reavie mold and kind of, adapt it to Brendan Todd and say that he'll probably play well too, I totally get it, right? Because Ches Reavie, not a long player, right? Extremely accurate off the tee, gets it done with the plotter sort of mindset. So Ches Reavie has that track record, right? I love him this week, just for full disclosure purposes, is somebody that's in my player pool. Brendan Todd, I'm not as high on this week, but you could use that same logic and play Brendan Todd. Now, if you take a look at the event history, it's nowhere near as elite as what you have with Ches Reavie. He did have a 9th place finish last year, 22nd there 2 years ago. So it's not bad course history by any means. It's just that, I don't know, there are guys around him. I don't want to give away too much there that I just like a little bit more this week. So I'm okay with Brendan Todd. I love Ches Reavie, and I think that's a good just encapsulation of this golf course. You've had guys like Cam Champ win this golf tournament, Brendan Steele, that's an exceptional off the tee player, and then you've had Ches Reavie. Stuart Sink way past his prime. I mean, looking way back, like Sang Moon Bae, right, won this golf tournament and he's atrocious off the tee. I mean, it's anyone can win. And I mean that in like the best way possible, right? Not like that shitty players can win this golf tournament. I more so mean that like any type of player, right, can have success at Silverado, which in my opinion makes us even more so a week to go out there and play the game theory edge, right? If there's not really one type of skill set that's going to get the job done, there shouldn't really be anyone out there that is way, way higher owned than their peers unless they're completely mispriced. And I think an example, at least for me, right, and you don't have to agree with this, right? You could totally fade Sahith. I get it because he's I think the highest owned player on the entire slate. But at $9,800, I think he's like $1,000 too cheap. Like I think he should be up there right around Justin Thomas when it comes to the price tag. So for me, it's worth the 20% ownership, right? So whereas with the rest of my player pool, it's a whole ton of pivots, right? A bunch of guys that are, at least moderately owned at the very most, or hopefully lower owned in a lot of other cases. Let's see. So we talked about Sahith. We talked about JT. Max Homa, I guess it's worth noting, guys. I just mentioned that Sahith was the highest owned player. That's fake news. That is not true. Max Homa is your highest owned player at right around 30%. Forgot about him for about 2 seconds there. So you're going to have to make a decision on Max on whether you're playing him or not. If you're going to get true the 2x leverage roll right out to a Max Homa, that is 60% of your lineups, about 2/3 of your lineups that you're, investing in a Max Homa with, which doesn't really sit all that well with me if I'm playing 150 lineups, right? Like I don't want to play Max Homa, at least personally. That's not something I want to do in like 100 lineups or like 80, 90 lineups, right? To go out there and get that 1.5x leverage. It's just not something that I do all that often when it comes to PGA DFS. I'd recommend taking that game theory edge out there a little bit. Steven Yeager still holding quite a bit of ownership. Same thing with Cam Davis. This 9K range, or specifically like the lower end of the 9K range, going a little bit overlooked. In fact, Andrew Putnam at about 15.1% is one of the higher owned players in this range. So JJ Spawn, a Bo Hostler, especially so with like an Alex Noren and a Webb Simpson, are leverage plays, right? Guys that you could take as maybe a second, third man in for a little bit of leverage in your lineup. Outside of that, though, this 8K range, pretty chalky, right? So from like Lucas Herbert the whole way down to, let's say, let's actually include like Kevin Streelman there, all getting quite a bit of ownership, some more than others, obviously. This top end of the 7K range has started to get a little bit more steam than it was there on a Monday, Tuesday. So Davis Thompson, probably the most popular out of the players there at the top of the sevens. And then when you start to get towards the bottom end of the 7K range, part of this is just the pricing, right? With so many options from like $7,500 to $7,000, ownership is pretty spread out. So if you're taking anyone down here, I guess Kevin Yu, right, like 10, 12% owned. Nate Lashley is still like 9% owned. So still getting a little bit of attention there. But outside of, I guess it's just those two, right? Off the top of my head, not a bunch of chalk down here at the bottom end of the 7K range. It's a lot of guys in that 2-3% range. So up top, maybe you pivot with the JT off of a Homa. Maybe you pivot starting with like a Sahith Theegala, right, as your first man in. You can take some chalk in this 8K range. I'm okay with that, right? But down here in the sevens, you've got pivots galore, right? You have a bunch of guys you can take at sub 5% ownership. So though I like guys like Stevens, Nate Lashley, for example, that are like 9% owned here, I have a ton of pivots in my player pool. A ton of guys are going to be sub 5% owned here. I mean, just to give you a few examples, like Mackenzie Hughes, like no one would think to play this guy, right? He's the most nondescript guy in human history, but he wins fall series events. RSM Classic, Sanderson Farms, the guy shows up in weak ass field events. Sometimes in majors, right? He'll show up too, like US Opens. You've seen him have those top 5 finishes, but when he wins, when he breaks slates, are at low ownership in these random ass events. So I know Mackenzie Hughes doesn't have the best form in human history, but he's had like a month off at this point. Maybe he comes back and has that spike performance. There are a bunch of guys like a Mackenzie Hughes in my player pool. As a reminder, check out my Patreon if you want access to my entire pool. But they're especially in like the bottom end of the sevens. Like I'll give you guys one more here, like Matthew Neesmith, right? Gaining a bunch of strokes on approach. he spikes in the fall. Like even in like decent field events, right? You'll see Matthew Neesmith have that top 10, top 15 every once in a while. But when you get him in a weak field event like this, that's when you see the top 5 or potentially even winning performances from Neesmith. I'm not even sure. I believe he's not a tour winner at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if either this year or next year, you saw him break through for his first ever win. I don't believe he's a tour winner. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But if he's not, I could see him having that maiden win over the next year or so, one of these weak field events. Down here in the 6K range, there's not much that I like. So one of the lower owned players that I'm getting a bunch of exposure to would be a Harry Hall. I think I have like 15% in my last run of lineups. But down here in the 6s, there's only like 4 or 5 guys I'm playing, period. One of them I'll give you is a Zach Johnson here. I am playing him heading into the Ryder Cup. It's more so that the golf course kind of fits him. Like a Ches Reavie plays well here, right? Like a Brendan Todd in theory could play well at Silverado. Well, that means that a Zach Johnson can play well, right? Really good wedge player, really good putter as well. It's a week to take a few chances. And in this weak field of event, I mean, as Zach Johnson, he could finish top 10. Like that's not outside of his range of outcomes and is essentially unowned when it comes to your GPP exposure. But outside of a few isolated scenarios, there's not much down here to play. I mean, you've got Kevin Kisner, who like has missed every cut in human history here at $6,600. There is somebody at $6,500 that I am playing this week, but it's just on a pure hunch, just a pure high upside play that I'm getting to there. But outside of that, I mean, it's a lot of 7K guys that I'm taking in my lineups. So what that's doing to my lineup construction, it doesn't have to do it to yours out there, right? I'm just trying to give you a little bit of perspective with what I'm working with here is I'm not taking a lot of like double 10K lineups. There's not a lot of lineups where I'm starting with like a JT and I'm not playing Max Homa, right? But if I were playing Max Homa and JT, I would not have a lot of lineups with them together. There's just not a lot of 6K options that I feel comfortable getting to. There's that one guy at $6,500 that I'm taking a shot on. But like outside of that, like the 4 or 5% of lineups that I'd be willing to even get exposure to right at $6,500, I don't even know if I'd get to this as a combination, right? It's just so expensive. You have to pretty much completely abandon the 8 and 9K range if you were to take both of those two players together. And it's not like the pricing of what we had in the playoffs where there are $5,500 golfers we can play, or like especially at the Tour Championship when like Jordan Spieth was like 6K or whatever he was in that sort of golf tournament. It's nowhere near the same. Like these 6K golfers, I mean, they're like creative golfers, right? Like it's like Kevin Roy. It's Kevin Kisner, who hasn't made a cut in God knows how long. It's a completely different scenario, right? Like the 7K golfers are much safer. They have much more upside than some of their 6K counterparts. And unless you're just willing to take a complete buckshot approach and a scatter shot down there in the 6s, I think it's going to be a tough week to go out there and find a ceiling performance. So that's what I'm working with lineup construction, a little bit more balanced than I would be in some of the maybe stronger field events. And a lot of this 8K range is getting hammered as a result. So I know we didn't talk up a lot of them as core plays, but there are a lot of high upside options in this 8K range that some of them are getting ownership, like Batia. I'll tell you, I'm playing Batia this week. He's getting some ownership, but I'm fine with that. He's got more than enough upside to substantiate that ownership. But like there are a few super low owned options in the 8K range you might want to consider too. I'll give you that one. It's Alex Noren, right? Is an example of a super low owned play that I'm getting to because he still has the upside. He was playing well over on the DP World Tour and he's like 8% owned. He's like half the ownership of an Andrew Putnam. So this 8K range, I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. I believe out of the like 6-7 players here, I have like 4 or 5 of them in my player pool. Just because of lineup construction, right? Because I'm not taking as many 6K golfers, I'm going to have a lot of the 8K range in my lineups. Let's catch up on chat, see if there's any questions about specific players. Then afterwards, we're going to talk about props. So let's see what's going on. We have a Harrison Endicott question. That's not the guy that I'm playing at $6,500, but I could see it. He played decently towards the end of last year. What I'm more so looking for in a guy down here in the 6K range is long-term upside, right? Like form, I'm completely throwing out the window. And that's for pretty much the entire player pool. That's not even just the 6K range. Like they've had a month away from golf. Some of them a month and a half, 2 months away from golf. Really recent form is almost like negligible to me. Like I want to know how they did all of last year. And Endicott would actually be a decent player, right? If you're looking at the season as a whole, made some cuts, had a few top 25 finishes. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely cheaper than I think he should be. Like he should probably be like $6,900. probably at least like $300, $400 more expensive. So I'm okay with him. I'm not playing him just for full transparency, but I could totally see it. I'm just going to tell you the $6,500 guy. It's Satoshi Kodaira. I'm playing Satoshi. He loves himself a short track. He's won at the RBC Heritage, which is a similarly short track. Emphasizes a lot of the same stats that you're going to see this week. I don't know. You could take shots on anyone down here. Endicott, honestly, if he's your guy, take him, right? Could totally see it. I'm not playing anyone else, but like if you wanted to play Echeverria, right, who plays well at big field events, I understand that. Like I'm not going to give you that much crap for it. If you want to play Brandon Matthews, because he's a very similar archetype to a Cameron Champ, right, that won this golf tournament, then play him, right? He's that bomber putter type of archetype that you're looking for out there. Really in the 6K range, it's a crapshoot. You're throwing darts at the very best with anyone that you're taking down here, right? Even Kodaira, like he's probably missing the cut. Let's be honest about it, right? He's probably missing the weekend. But if he can pay off at like 0.1, 0.2% ownership, I think I had him like closer to like 0.5% ownership off the top of my head, then that's going to be infinite leverage to the field, right? Especially if you were to somehow top 5, top 10, then you're looking at the absolute nuts, right, in that sort of contest. So it's super high upside to get to players down here. But outside of a few isolated cases, again, there's like a handful of guys I'm playing down here in the 6K range. I think you're playing a losing game, right? You're playing a very much so negative EV game, trying to take a bunch of guys down there. Let's see. Are we thinking approach and putting are more important metrics? For sure. Those are two of the more important metrics, no matter what golf tournament you're looking at. I would say focus on the wedges if you're looking at approach play. And then with putting, you can look at the bent POA numbers. So I would probably try and be a little bit more specific about it. But yeah, you're spot on. What do I think about Eric Cole this weekend? As a missed cut here last year, but it was his first start. I don't want to give away too much because he's up there in this 9K range, right, about my exposure. But I'm very much so a fan of Eric Cole's game. I think he's one of the better players in this field. I'd probably say that he's a top 5 player in this field when it comes to talent level. I think he's better than Steven Yeager. I think he's probably long-term going to be better than Cam Davis. And I think you're going to see Eric Cole as a multiple-time tour winner by the time he's all said and done. I'm not going to tell you if I'm playing him or not, but that should probably give you the answer. Let me just say that much. If I'm not positive about him, right? Matthias Schmid, decent European tour form, Chris, but I think he's going to be higher owned than most people are expecting. My last ownership run, I think I had him at like 3.5% ownership. In higher stakes stuff, he's going to be like 5 to 10% owned. So just know what you're getting yourself into. The higher stakes contests that you're playing in, the higher ownership that you're going to see on Matthias Schmid. But in large field GPPs, I think enough people aren't going to look at the DP World Tour stuff that you can play him, right? That he can be, especially if you're taking like 10, 15% of Schmid, you can get really good leverage there. But in large field stuff, like if you're thinking you're taking a pivot play, just know that guys like Schmid always are like twice the ownership in those contests. What do I think about Eckroat for this course? I think that in general, Eckroat's a pretty good player. He showed that last year, 2022, 2023. And he had a really bad end to the year, right? Was horrible in recent form. He's number 57 in the field when it comes to recent form rank. So in terms of course fit, he doesn't really do one thing well. I mean, he's like just good at everything. Like he's slightly above average at pretty much all 4 stat categories. So in terms of course fit, right? I mean, I'm not looking for much this week, right? I don't think there's one certain stat that you have to have. So if you're somebody that's very well balanced, maybe that's what we're looking for, right? That can do everything well at a course where you really don't need one thing. Maybe that's a good thing. I really couldn't tell you. He doesn't have a huge sample size here. I believe year 1, he missed the cut, but let me double check on that. Eckroat, year 1, might as well have missed the cut, right? He finished in 64th place. But yeah, I'll just tell you, I'm playing him. He's a high upside, just I think better player than the price tag, right? You saw that last year. He had some top end finishes in pretty decent field events. And I know the recent form's bad. Like his last few events, he didn't look like himself, right? The ball striking went away. I've heard every argument against playing Austin Eckroat this week from a few people on my Discord. But at the same time, Austin Eckroat, right, has way more top 10s, top 25s than like everyone else around it, right? There's been a month away from golf, 6 weeks away from golf from a lot of people out there. I mean, if we're resetting people back to like their longer term baselines, then Austin Eckroat should be like 9K. realistically, right, if we're doing that for everyone in the field, then Austin Eckler, it's like $1,000 too cheap. So I'm with you on that, man. I think he's a good play. Look at Jimmy Walker's strokes gained at this course. I haven't looked at it, but I'll look at it here in a second, Chris. Can you go through the Euro golf props later? I can, Curtis. But let me look at Jimmy Walker real quick. I don't know if I have the stats from last year in my model, so I think I'm going to have to go to a database real quick. So bear with me real quick, and I'll do that. Let's see. So I'm assuming they're really good, or assuming it's like a bunch of, strokes lost putting or something like that with some ball striking. Let's see what we've got here. So let's see. Database pulled up, and it's from last year's event. So we'll see what we're working with. Here's good old Jimmy Walker. So in 2022 at the Fortinet Championship, he was really good on approach. He was okay off the tee, and then he lost 3 strokes putting. Yeah, I called it, right? It was going to be the good old ball striking year without the putter. I'm okay with it. I mean, the putter got hot for like a month stretch last year, and that's when he had those top 15 finishes. But I mean, outside of that, right, he finished with 3 straight missed cuts. He had a bunch of, missed cuts to start the year last year. I'm okay with it as a flyer. I'll say that much. I think he's an okay flyer, but like, I kind of worry about it. Like, he's just not a very good player anymore. Can you go through the Euro golf routes? Oh, sorry, we already said that. Yeah, absolutely, Curtis. All right, let's go through some lineup construction stuff, and then afterwards we're going to talk props. So if you want to go through any players last second, let me know down in chat, and we'll talk through some lineup construction. So the issue with starting with like a Homa and JT here, right, is that it forces you down into the 6K range. Right? If you were to start with these 2 players, that puts you at $7,100. That's why a lot of my lineups are starting like a JT, maybe taking like a Putnam as my second man in, and then taking one more 8K option and living a lot more balanced, right? So just to show you 3 of the core plays that you can throw into a lineup, that leaves you at $7,300 remaining for 3 spots. So maybe you take one 6K range player that's like a guy towards the top of that range. So like I told you, I'm playing Zach Johnson, right? So maybe you throw him in there. Well, now you're back up to $7,600. And even if you don't do that, you want to take all 7K players. Maybe you go up here and throw Harry Hall into a lineup, right? One of my value plays this week. Now you're back up to 75. So as long as you're not taking like a JT and Homa together, lineups are relatively easy to make. I mean, or even like a Homa, right? Jaeger, even starting like a JT Jaeger, right? All of those kind of combinations, at least to me, are just a little bit too rich. So I'm trying to stay a little bit more balanced. If I was playing in cash, I really like the 8K range this week, but I would probably start with a Sahith. I'd take a few 8K guys like a Batia probably in my cash lineup. Might even throw in like a Doug Yim because of the ball striking upside, and then just live in the top end of the 7s. I think Bazane Hoot, based on his ball striking form, his approach form in general, makes sense. You could even throw like a Austin Eckroyd into that lineup, and then Davis Thompson, who's going to be really chalky for GPP lineups. I wouldn't mind in that kind of build as well. So like cash, way more balanced than even my GPP lineups would be. I don't know if you need a 10K option. I mean, you could take a Homa if you wanted to, right? Like, I guess he would be the one guy to consider up there in the 10K range for your cash lineups, but he's 11K, right? You're spending quite a bit to go out there and take a Max Homa. That's why I don't mind starting with a Sahith, right? Somebody that I think top 10s at this golf tournament. In GPPs, just take your pivots, right? It's not who you play, it's how you play them. So if you're going to start a little bit chalkier than most, maybe it's a Sahith, a Putnam, and let's find one more chalky piece and like throw a Batia in there. That would be 3 players that are going to be 15+% owned. Well, for your last 3 spots, right, you're going to have to differentiate. So up here in the 7s, maybe you try and find a true pivot, which I'm not a huge fan of Peter Kest, right? I'm not playing him this week, but if you really needed a pivot there, maybe you throw Peter Kest in there. Maybe you go out here and play Taylor Pendrith, who's not super chalky this week. You kind of got to force yourself into more of a different build. So I'll just tell you personally, I don't love starting with these 3 players to begin with. I want to give myself a little bit more leeway down here in the 7s. So I'll go out here, take a Eckroyd, who's maybe a little bit higher owned than some of those other players, and then force in a pivot in the 8K range, right? So maybe rather than taking Batia, I go out there and throw a Alex Noren into this kind of lineup. That's where I'd rather make some of the pivots. So lineup construction is going to be very unique to your player pool, right? The guys that you're taking in your lineups. But personally, I'm a lot more balanced than I've seen most weeks. And I'd say a lot of my pivots are like this like upper 8K, lower 9K range. There are quite a few guys that I see at low ownership that I think are worth some investment in this week. Let's see if there's any last second DFS questions. And if not, we're going to talk some props. Gim, Reeve, and Suh. I like the first two there, Marino. Last one, not my favorite. Just honestly, and I have nothing against Justin Suh. He's just not my favorite play this week. Whereas Reeve, Gim, I think are some of my favorite plays on the slate. But again, if you want to play a guy, play him. That's fine, right? The idea of who I'm playing and then, that correlating to who you should play is completely false, right? Like, let's be real. I'm playing in GPPs and I have a relatively low chance of taking it down, right? I mean, you're talking about playing against thousands of other people, right? If you're copying exactly what I'm doing, that's negative EV for you personally, right? Because you're playing the same exact players as somebody else. But second off, I still have that low percent chance of winning, right? So like, don't let that sway you. If you like Justin Suh, play him this week. Don't get me wrong, okay? It's just not my favorite play. I'll give you that perspective. So let's go through a few props on here. In terms of PGA props, over here on Underdog, I thought there were some overs on birdies that you can take, but a lot of it has gotten bumped. And I don't know what it is with Underdog. They added the correlation rules. They've gotten a lot more bump heavy over the last few weeks. Is what it is, I guess. They're just kind of swaying towards that direction. I don't know whether it's because of some of the bonus money that they're giving out or some of the advertising that they're doing. It just seems like they're being a lot more tight with their money, right? They're trying to kind of like tighten up the business a little bit, not giving nearly as much value as what we've seen in the past, which is kind of unfortunate. I've been limited over here. You can see if I click a few props in here, again, these are just random props that I clicked. You can see I have $100 max now. So that went from $250. In other sports, I had maxes of like $500 to $1,000. All of those have gone down to 100, and happened after a few NFL plays, believe it or not. It wasn't even like golf that I think got me limited. It was a few NFL plays that I locked in that got bumped through the absolute roof. And I guess the trading team must have seen that and didn't like what they see. Didn't like what they saw out there, I should say. So if you're going to take anything right now, this fantasy score prop on JT didn't get bumped. And this birdie prop on Sahith didn't get bumped. Over here on FanDuel, I'm actually going to bring up the sports book real quick, show you guys what I'm talking about. Both of them are plus EV plays. So 1 second while I find that for you guys. And then show you what I'm talking about. So for like the first week I've ever seen on FanDuel, we have birdie or better props to choose from. And we have both sides to work with. So let me see if we can find all of the wagers. Oh, sorry, wrong golf tournament there. But we can circle back and find this one. So it's on their specials page over here on FanDuel. If you scroll to the bottom down here, they have birdies are better for certain players, right? So you can see here, birdies are better for Sahith Theegala. They have it minus 125. For JT, they have them at minus 140 to go over 4.5 birdies. So maybe actually we take the JT one. They had Sahith at minus 142. I guess they must have gotten some action on the under there, which has swayed it slightly more in the other direction. But yeah, JT, right? Minus 140 to go over the 4.5 birdie number there. Max Homa is minus 165 to go over 4.5 birdies. Unfortunately, he's at 5 birdies over there on the underdog side. So unless that's gotten bumped, I mean, we can check that. No, he's still at 5 birdies. But like JT here is going to be excellent value. And let's find one little pairing we can go with. I'd prefer to be an AM Wave golfer, but they've bumped all of those through the roof. Sahith Theegala is somebody that I think has a really good week. These props aren't great though. I mean, ideally, we could just take the 2 birdie props together, but they have a new rule against that, of course, over here in Underdog. But let's find something else for you. I'm sure we can find something. Not everything's been bumped. So yeah, this over on Christian Bezainhout for fantasy points, if he shoots -1 with 3 birdies or -1 with 4 birdies, he covers this mark over here. So a lot of that's dependent on whether he makes a double bogey or not. If he makes a double, it makes it a little bit more difficult for Seabez to cover this number. But based on the fact that he's at 70.5 strokes, right, and he can shoot a 71 and hit this on a lot of different scenarios, makes me think that it's really good value at this projection. So my favorite prop by far in the underdog board would have to be this over for Justin Thomas on birdies. But yeah, this Christian Bezainhout that hasn't been bumped would be a decent option as well. And let me see if there's anything else. Actually, speaking of, this over on Max Homa fantasy score was a prop I took too, and that also wasn't bumped. The thing is with this Max Homa prop, he can shoot -3, so a 69, and end up covering this prop. which would be over his strokes projection, right? And if we go over here and look at some of the round score props, I believe they have a Max Homa prop on here at the bottom. Let's see, where's good old Max Homa? I know he's on the board. We just got to find where he is. They have a bunch of guys on here. So there he is. Right? He's at 68.5 strokes. I know he's minus 150 towards the over, right? But even if he shoots 69, right, which is over his prop, I mean, that would hit at this for, I think, almost every scenario, right? I think the only prop, I think you'd have to get at least 4 birdies and 1 bogey to go out there and get over this fantasy score prop. So these would probably be some of my favorite props. You could take the CBES prop instead if you wanted to, because they're at 23.95. But the thing that's going for Max Homa here is that he's an AM wave tee time. They're on the West Coast, right? So they're teeing off at like 7:28 local. That feels like a pretty good spot to get to. So that's what I would do on Underdog. Over here in Prize Picks, there haven't been a ton of bumps. I consider this under at 69 strokes for Homa. I know he's at 68.5 and slightly juiced towards the over. But if he shoots 69, once again, right, that's a push, right? Let alone all the opportunity for him to go under his prop, which I think makes this a good spot to get to. And then if I was going to play anything else over here, it would undoubtedly be this Akshay under 70.5. He's minus 150 on, I believe, on pretty much all these books to go under this. But let me find Batia on specifically FanDuel to show you what we're working with. I believe he's minus 150. He might be minus 140 here on FanDuel. So he's still minus 150. They're at 70.5. Like, I would absolutely take these unders. I know Max Homa at 69 doesn't feel great because he's projected so much better than the rest of the field. But unlike like all the other studs, right? He's the only AMT time. Like, and you're not going to call Bo Hostler a stud, right? He's like a middle tier player at the very best. He's only half a stroke higher, right? So like, let's not kid ourselves. Max Homa could probably be at 68.5 strokes. So I think there's some value there. You obviously have the push equity at 69. And then, Batia, I know he's a PM wave golfer, but he's still minus 150 to go over that number at pretty much every sports book. So we'll look at some Euro props here in a second. Let's see if there's any questions about props. Looks like we're good there. So, okay, let's hop over to Euro. So in terms of the Euro props, I don't think they have them over here in Underdog, but I'll double check. Let's see. Have they added Euro props? Not quite yet. But over here on the Prize Pick side, a few guys that I would argue that you could consider as well. So this golf course is going to be much harder to read. If you were going to do this on like a unit basis, I'd do like a half a unit bet if you're going to do anything on the Euro golf side. A couple of reasons for that. It's much more unpredictable. We have much less info than we have for these PGA Tour courses. And the weather models, at least that I have access to on windy.com, don't seem to be all that accurate over there in Europe. So the wind conditions look low tomorrow. It looks like the afternoon might be a little bit windier than what you have in the morning hours. So I'm trying to take some AM wave unders. One under that I took was this under on Billy Horschel. The scoring average at this course is normally right around like a half a stroke under par, sometimes closer to even par. But Billy Horschel averages 3.3 shots gained per round at Wentworth. And that's on 11 rounds, right? So it's not like he played here once, won the golf tournament, and then got out of town. Over a 3-event sample size, he gains over 3 strokes around. So if we're going to assume that the scoring average was like 0.5 under par, and we only gave him half of his average, right? Let's only give him 1.6 strokes under par, right? Let's cut that average and cut it in half. Well, that's a 70 right there, right? That's 2 under par, right? That's gaining a stroke and a half to the field with a half a stroke under par scoring average. That's -2 right there. So he's got the AM wave tee time going for him, and he plays way better than that average, right? That we cut down for him. That's why I think that he's good value. Another player that you could consider for an under, I did fade somebody, but I'm just going to give you another under, right? You got to check out the Patreon for all of my exposure. And I haven't put this on the Patreon yet. It would be this Jon Rahm under 69 strokes. This recently got bumped up from 68.5 to 69 strokes. And I think that's a mistake. He's the #1 player in the history of this golf course when it comes to shots gained, and he gains over 4 strokes per round at this golf course. So once again, right, if we use the half a stroke under par average and we only give him half of his strokes to the field, right, that is 69.5 right there, right? And that would be slightly over his projection, but that would be half of his powers, right? Let alone assuming that it's Jon Rahm, right? Somebody who on the PGA Tour, a much more difficult tour, is routinely gaining like 3 strokes per round. I think the 4 strokes per round average at this golf course is pretty realistic for Jon Rahm. So I haven't put this one on the Patreon yet, believe it or not, I will be here soon when I can get exposure. I can't enter another slip until midnight. It'd probably be the John Rahm under, which recently opened up. I'm not sure when this actually bumped up from 68.5 to 69 strokes. But yeah, even as a PM Wave tee time, he's just a better player than that projection. Like Tommy Fleetwood, even at 69.5, you could take for an under, right? Especially a John Rahm, who I think is just much better player than some of the other guys here, stroke higher. Let's see what we're working with. In terms of, I guess, they don't even have another board up. They don't even have birdies or better up for either sport, huh? Unfortunate. I mean, I know they have dedicated golf guys over there on Prize Picks, so they should be able to post a birdie or better board, but I guess that's asking too much. So maybe we'll get one by the end of the night. If we do, I'll try and add a little bit of exposure over here, but I mean, we're really left with not many options, right? I do have more prop slips in over here for Euro, over here for PGA as well, that I've got to keep a little bit behind the paywall. So if you're looking for the rest of what I'm entering, check out the Patreon. You guys know the deal, right? You've been here for long enough. But outside of that, I don't have much more to go over here. I would leave you with this, saying that there's not much of a weather edge this week. So if you're playing props, I mean, AM Wave is going to be the way to go for the next 2 days. But for main slate kind of stuff, I don't know if I'd worry about it all that much. So if you're just tuning in, maybe you didn't catch the beginning parts of the stream, more than anything, it's a game theory slate. I know Max Homa won this last year. I know if we click up here and go over to 2022, Max Homa's the champion once again. If he goes out there, has a three-peat this year, I'm going to lose money in DFS, right? I'll just tell you, I'm full fading him this week, taking that game theory approach. And it might come back to burn me. That's for damn sure. But on a week without a weather edge, that's all we've got, right? Little game theory edge to go after out there. So I'm trying to generate as much plus EV as possible. And that's going to be one of my big decision points. But until then, until next time, guys, best of luck with your lineups out there. We'll be doing showdown streams for rounds 2 through 4. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so you don't miss any of those when we go live. We'll be touching on props for Friday through Sunday, also showdown for rounds 2 through 4. You guys know the deal there as well. Also football content for Sunday Night Football, main slate, and Monday. It's a busy time of the year here on the channel. I appreciate all the support here. Smash that like button on the way out. And I'll catch you guys at the live streams throughout the weekend.